Have you ever really stopped to think about why the world is organized the way it is?
How do you mean?
I mean, politically.
Yeah.
You open up a map on your phone, you see all these lines, these colors, these countries, and we sort of take it for granted that the government on one side of that line can't tell the people on the other side what to do.
It's the stay in your lane theory of global politics.
Exactly. And it feels completely natural. But I was going through the source for today's deep dive, Henry Kissinger's big book, World Order, and it hit me that this whole system, it's not natural at all. It's an invention.
It is absolutely an invention, and it's one that was born out of just sheer exhaustion and incredible amount of bloodshed. It is not the human default setting.
That is exactly what we're getting into today. We're doing a deep dive into world order.
Right.
Now, before you tune out, I know you hear Kissinger and you think, dusty textbooks or 1970s politics, but hold on.
Please hold on, because this is directly relevant to what's in your newsfeed right now.
It really is. This isn't just history. It's like the instruction manual for the modern world. And the kind of scary part of Kissinger's argument is that the binding on that manual is, well, it's starting to fall apart.
The system is glitching. And to understand the glitches, what's happening in the Middle East, what Russia's up to, you have to understand the original code. Kissinger's point is that our idea of world order, this whole respect the borders thing, is a specifically European idea. He calls it the Westphalian model.
But the big problem is that not everybody else in the world downloaded that particular update.
That's the core of it. That is the friction. There are other completely competing ideas of what order even is, and Kissinger looks at two big ones. The universalist model you see in the history of Islam, and also in the Chinese imperial tradition. These are worldviews that they don't see a map of equal states. They see something else entirely.
So what Kissinger is saying is when we see chaos in the world, it's not just a political disagreement. It's a collision of fundamentally different operating systems.
It's a hardware incompatibility. You're trying to run one piece of software on hardware that was never designed for it, and the whole thing just crashes.
Okay, I love that analogy. So to understand the crash, we have to go back to the original installation. We have to talk about where this Westphalian system even came from.
And it starts in a place of absolute horror. We have to go back to the 17th century, the 30 Years' War.
Right, the 30 Years' War. It's one of those things you hear about in history class and then immediately forget. Was it really that bad?
It was apocalyptic. I mean, for 30 years, Central Europe was just a battlefield, a war of all against all, driven mostly by religious fanaticism, Catholics versus Protestants.
What's the scale we're talking about here?
About a third of the population in Central Europe died. A third. In some parts of what's now Germany, it was closer to half. Society just collapsed. We're talking cannibalism, plague, total devastation. And the reason it was so unstoppable was that there was no common ground.
What do you mean?
Well, each side believed they had a monopoly on divine truth. And if you think your enemy is literally an agent of Satan, you don't make a deal with them.
You can't compromise with heresy.
You can't. You have to exterminate it. So after 30 years of this, Europe is basically a depopulated ruin, and the leaders finally realize, okay, we have to stop this, or there will be nothing left to rule.
So they meet in 1648, the Peace of Westphalia. But this wasn't some, fancy summit with photo ops.
Oh, not at all. The hatred was still so intense they wouldn't even meet in the same town. The Catholic delegation was in Münster. The Protestants were 30 miles away in Osnabrück.
Wow.
And the conditions were terrible. The source mentions the Swiss envoy had to stay in a room above a weaver's shop that, and this is a quote, stank of sausage and fish oil.
So these guys are inhaling fish fumes, trying to figure out how to save the world. What was the big idea they came up with?
The breakthrough was, in a way, deeply cynical. They basically said, look, we are never, ever going to agree on which religion is the true one, so let's stop trying to agree on truth. Let's just agree on a process.
That feels like a huge step down.
It was a practical one. They came up with a principle in Latin, cuius regio eius religio.
Whose realm, his religion.
Exactly. The local ruler decides the religion of their own state. And the key part is the neighbors have to butt out. Even if you think they're all heretics going to hell, you have to respect their border.
And that's it. That's the birth of national sovereignty.
That's the moment.
Yeah.
Before this, you had the Pope, or the Holy Roman Emperor, claiming this universal authority. After this, the state becomes the basic building block of European order. It wasn't a moral breakthrough. It was, as Kissinger writes, a practical accommodation to reality.
The system we live under today wasn't designed by idealists. It was designed by exhausted survivors.
Pretty much. It's a survival mechanism.
Okay, so that sets up the system of independent states. But what stops one big, powerful state from just gobbling up all the smaller ones? This is where Cardinal Richelieu comes in.
Ah, Richelieu, yes. He is the architect of the modern state in many ways. He was a cardinal, a prince of the Catholic Church in France.
Right, which is what makes him so complicated, because he was a Catholic cardinal who actively fought against the Catholic Holy Roman Emperor. He sided with the Protestant princes. How does that make any sense?
It only makes sense if you realize his primary loyalty wasn't to his religion, but to France. He pioneered this idea he called raison d'etat,
The reason of the state?
the national interest. He basically argued that the state is this abstract thing, and it has its own needs, its own morality that's completely separate from the ruler's personal soul.
There's that incredible quote in the book. He said, "Man is immortal, his salvation is hereafter. The state has no immortality, its salvation is now or never."
And that is the core of it. A ruler's soul might go to heaven, but the state of France could be destroyed tomorrow. And at the time, France was surrounded by the Catholic Habsburg Empire. So for the state to survive, Richelieu argued, you had to break that encirclement, even if it meant allying with Protestant heretics.
So he purposefully worked to keep Central Europe divided.
He did. It was pure strategy over ideology. And this is what establishes the idea of the balance of power. You form shifting alliances to make sure no single country gets powerful enough to dominate everyone else.
Okay, so that's the European model. A pluralistic system of states all balancing each other. But here's where we get to the core of the problem. While all this is happening in Europe,
The Middle East is running a completely different operating system. While Europe was moving towards plurality, the Islamic world, especially the Ottoman Empire, was built on the concept of universality.
meaning there's only one true system.
Yes. In the classical view, the world isn't really divided into equal countries. It's divided into two zones. There's Dar al-Islam, the House of Islam, which is the realm of peace and order.
And then there's everywhere else.
And there's Dar al-Harb, the realm of war, everywhere else, which is seen as territory that will, eventually, be brought into the House of Islam.
That doesn't really leave much room for the idea of equal sovereign states.
It leaves no room, and Kissinger points out this fascinating detail. The Ottoman sultans, historically, they didn't sign treaties with European nations because a treaty implies equality. It says, I recognize your right to exist is the same as mine. The Ottomans didn't see it that way. Instead, they would grant privileges.
It's like saying, I'm allowing you to trade with me, for now, out of my generosity.
Precisely. Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror told the Italian city-states flat out, there must be only one empire, one faith, and one sovereignty in the world.
Wow, that is a fundamentally different vision.
It's completely incompatible with Westphalia, which says, you do you, I'll do me. Universality says, there is only one me, and eventually you'll be part of it.
So you fast forward to the 20th century. The Ottoman Empire collapses after World War I. And the Europeans, Sykes and Picot, they just show up the ruler and draw lines on a map.
And they say, congratulations, you're Iraq, you're Syria, you're now Westphalian states. And Kissinger argues that this mismatch is the source of so much of the region's modern turmoil. You impose this foreign concept of national borders onto a culture whose entire history was about the Ummah, the single unified community of believers.
It's trying to run that iPhone app on an Android phone again.
And the system is rejecting the app. This is what leads to the rise of modern Islamism. And we need to be clear, we're talking about a political ideology, not the religion of Islam itself.
Right, this isn't about personal faith. It's about revolutionaries who reject the whole idea of the nation state.
You have to look at figures like Hassan al-Banna, who founded the Muslim Brotherhood, and especially Sayyid Qutb's
Qutb's book, Milestones, is basically the founding text for groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, right? It is. And his core argument was that all existing governments, even in Muslim countries, were illegitimate if they weren't ruling strictly by religious law. He called the nation state a form of idolatry.
Because you're putting your loyalty to a flag, to a man-made border above your loyalty to God?
Exactly. So when a group like ISIS comes along, their goal isn't just to take over a government. It's to literally erase the Westphalian map.
Which is why they made such a big deal of bulldozing the border between Iraq and Syria.
It was a symbolic act. They were saying, this line is a lie.
So let's look at how this plays out today. Kissinger gives two major case studies, Saudi Arabia and Iran.
And they are fascinating because they represent two very different approaches to this paradox.
Let's start with Saudi Arabia.
The Saudis are living a contradiction. On the one hand, they are a pillar of the Westphalian system, UN member, U.S. ally, deeply tied into the global economy.
But on the other hand,
Their internal legitimacy, the whole reason the Al Saud family rules, is based on Wahhabism, which is a deeply puritanical, universalist version of Islam.
so how do they manage that balancing act?
For decades, their strategy was what Kissinger calls indirectness. Essentially, they exported the problem. They would fund religious schools, madrasas all over the world to, satisfy their religious obligations and keep the most zealous people busy somewhere else.
Get the radicals focused on the far enemy instead of the near enemy.
And it worked for a while until it backfired because Osama bin Laden, a Saudi, took that very ideology that the state had promoted and turned it back against the Saudi regime itself.
So now they're trapped.
They're caught between the threat of a rising Shia Iran on one side and the threat of internal Sunni radicalism on the other, all while trying to maintain their alliance with the West. It's an impossible position.
Okay, so that's Saudi Arabia. Now let's look across the Gulf at Iran.
Iran is a totally different case. You have to remember, Persia has its own ancient imperial history. They see themselves as a center of civilization going back thousands of years.
So when the 1979 revolution happened, Ayatollah Khomeini wasn't just trying to run Iran. He was trying to start a global movement.
Absolutely. He viewed the state not as the end goal, but as a vehicle for a global religious revolution. It was an explicit challenge to the whole regional order.
There's a speech from the current supreme leader, Khamenei, that the book mentions, from around the time of the Arab Spring. It's really telling.
It's a perfect example of this clash of worldviews.
Right.
We in the West saw the Arab Spring and thought, oh, they want liberal democracy. We projected our own values onto it.
But Khamenei saw something totally different.
He looked at it and called it an Islamic awakening. He explicitly said this was a rejection of Western values and would lead to a brilliant Islamic civilization.
So if you're a diplomat trying to negotiate a nuclear deal or a border dispute,
You are speaking a different language. You're talking about stability and national interest, which are Westphalian concepts. And your counterpart may be operating from a framework that sees your entire system as illegitimate and doomed to collapse. It makes finding a stable balance incredibly difficult.
which brings us to today and the role of the United States. We're supposed to be the main defender of this Westphalian system.
But Kissinger says we're ambivalent about it. We're confused.
How so?
Well, we defend the system of sovereignty when it suits us, but we also have our own kind of universalism, right? We push for democracy, for human rights.
Which sounds good.
It does. But think about it. When we tell another country how to treat its citizens or that it needs to hold elections, that is a direct violation of the core Westphalian principle of non-interference.
So we want everyone to respect borders, but we also want them to adopt our values. And those two things can be in conflict.
They are constantly in conflict, and look what happens when the state collapses entirely, like in Libya or Syria after the Arab Spring. What filled that vacuum wasn't democracy. It was chaos and non-state actors like ISIS.
This gets to what I think is Kissinger's most important point. The idea that a stable order needs two things: legitimacy and power. Can you break that down?
Yeah, this is the key. Legitimacy is a set of rules that everyone more or less agrees on. It's the shared understanding of how the game is played. Power is the ability to enforce those rules.
If you have power without legitimacy,
You have tyranny, brute force.
and if you have legitimacy without power,
You have a strongly worded letter from the UN that everyone ignores. It's just empty talk.
and Kissinger's argument is that this balance is breaking down all over the world.
Yes. He says Europe has lots of rules, lots of legitimacy, but it has mostly given up the hard power to enforce them. The Middle East is full of power struggles, but there's no agreed-upon legitimacy, no shared set of rules.
And a country like Russia.
Is actively challenging the legitimacy of the rules themselves.
So why does any of this matter to someone listening to this right now? Why does a treaty from 1648 matter?
It matters because we have come to take order for granted. We assume peace is the natural state of things. Kissinger's point is the exact opposite. Chaos is the natural state. Order is a fragile thing that has to be built and constantly maintained.
It's a garden that needs tending.
Exactly. And if you stop tending it, the weeds grow back fast. His warning is that if the major global powers can't agree on a new set of rules for the 21st century, a new Westphalia, the alternative isn't just disagreement, it's the chaos of the 30 Years' War, but on a global scale.
With nuclear weapons.
With nuclear weapons, cyber warfare, AI, the whole thing.
That is a deeply sobering thought. That we're just drifting. And the question it leaves you with is, can a world with such radically different histories and worldviews ever truly agree on a common system? Or are we just fated to keep colliding?
It is the question of our time, and finding an answer requires a level of both humility and strength that is very hard to come by.
And on that note, we'll leave it for this deep dive. It turns out those guys in that smelly room in 1648 really were onto something. Thanks for listening. And keep thinking about those lines on the map. They matter a lot more than you might think.